It started with a yellow envelope, slapped across my front door like a scarlet letter. Notice of violation. Excessive water usage. Fine. $1,200. The HOA logo stared back at me like a judge's gavel. I stood frozen on the porch, morning coffee in hand, as the words burned themselves into my brain. $1,200 for what? I live in Pinebrook Ridge, a neighborhood that looks perfect from the outside. Perfect hedges. Perfect homes. Perfect people. But beneath the manicured lawns and friendly waves lies a silent regime led by one woman. Karen Albridge, HOA President, former real estate agent, full-time dictator in yoga pants. Karen runs Pinebrook like a suburban monarchy. She decides what color your shutters should be, when you're allowed to mow your lawn, and now, apparently, how much water you can use before she drops the hammer. I tore the notice open with shaking hands. The accusation was blunt. Unreasonable increase in water consumption detected. Violates Section 3A of HOA Water Conservation Standards. Fine impose. I blinked. This had to be a mistake. I'd been careful, obsessively careful, about water. After last summer's drought warnings, I replaced my front lawn with drought-resistant plants, installed drip irrigation, and even swapped my toilets for low-flow models. My water bills had been dropping for months. But this made no sense. Still holding the notice, I crossed the street to Karen's house. I knew she'd be home. She always was. The door opened before I knocked. She stood there, arms crossed, clipboard in hand like a badge of office. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her eyes calculating. "Ah," she said, without a trace of warmth. "Figured you'd be by." "There's been a mistake," I said, holding up the letter. "I'm not overusing water. My bill." "I've already reviewed the numbers," she cut in. "The HOA has full access to individual meter readings. Your usage is up 300%. "That's impossible," I replied. "I have xeriscaping. Drip lines. I've made every change you asked for. Intentions don't matter, Mr. Dalton. Results do." Her eyes narrowed with satisfaction, like she was enjoying the confrontation. "If you have a complaint," she continued, "you may present it at the hearing. Tuesday, 5 p.m., HOA office. Attendance is mandatory." And just like that, she shut the door in my face. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Every time I tried to relax, I imagined that smug expression on Karen's face. The idea that she could arbitrarily accuse me and fine me without due process burned like acid. I checked my meter, checked the irrigation timer. Nothing was wrong. And yet, when I logged into my utility portal, the numbers were undeniable. Last month, 3,200 gallons. This month, 14,900. Something was deeply wrong. The hearing was a joke. A single folding table had been dragged into the community center, flanked by Karen and two of her loyal board members, retired busybodies who nodded when she nodded and frowned when she frowned. I was given no legal representation, no water authority official to explain the data, not even the chance to present my utility history. Karen led the proceedings like a courtroom drama in which she played judge, jury, and executioner. "Your property has recorded excessive water usage in violation of HOA policy," she intoned, as though reading from a script she'd memorized in front of a mirror. I pushed a folder across the table. "This is documentation of every water-saving upgrade I've installed, including timestamps, receipts, and my water bills for the last 6 months." She flipped through them without interest. "That may be, but your current bill doesn't lie. A fine has been imposed. Failure to pay within 30 days will result in a lien being placed against your property." I stared at her. "Karen, this isn't just unfair. It's illogical. If there's a sudden spike, shouldn't the water company be involved? Shouldn't there be an inspection?" She shrugged. "We trust our data." "Your data is wrong." One of the board members cleared his throat. "You'll have to appeal through the proper channels." "And where exactly do those lead?" Karen smiled. Me. I left the hearing dazed and angry. What was I supposed to do? Pay for water I didn't use? Let Karen walk all over me while hiding behind bylaws written in legalese? That night, I sat in my backyard, staring at the moonlit gravel where my lawn used to be. I thought about the hours I'd spent making this property sustainable, the money, the effort. Then I heard a rustling over the fence. Rough day. It was my neighbor, Carlos Alvarez, peering over from his deck. You could say that, I said. Karen just fined me $1,200 for excessive water usage. But I've barely used a drop. Carlos nodded slowly. That's how it starts. I looked at him. What do you mean? She did the same thing to me. Last year. Claimed my numbers were too high. I replaced pipes, dug up my yard, spent thousands. Water bill never changed. What happened? I gave up. Paid the fine. She moved on to someone else. I felt a chill pass through me. She ever find out what caused it? I asked. He hesitated. No. But between you and me, I think something's fishy. I checked everything. No leaks, no broken lines. It was like the water was going somewhere else. Carlos's words stuck with me long after I went inside. The water was going somewhere else. I pulled up my bill again, looked at the graph. The spike hadn't been gradual. It happened over a single week and stayed high ever since. Not a leak. Not regular use. Something else. Something deliberate? I stood at my window, eyes drifting across the street to Karen's house. Her lawn was green. Very green, considering she'd been the biggest advocate of water conservation in the entire neighborhood. I glanced down at the notice, still clutched in my hand. She wanted me to believe I was the problem. But what if I wasn't? What if she was?
I started the next morning early, with a notebook in hand, a fresh cup of black coffee, and a gnawing sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and if I had to unravel it one sprinkler head at a time, so be it. I began by tracing every water line on my property. The front yard, with its stonescape and drip system, looked untouched. No burst lines, no soggy soil. I crawled beneath the deck, shimmied behind the water heater, even climbed into the crawlspace with a flashlight and scraped knees. Nothing. Everything was dry. Too dry, even. If I didn't know any better, I'd say my system hadn't used any water at all lately. But my meter kept spinning. By noon, I was covered in dirt and spider webs, but my theory was forming. I didn't have a leak. Someone else was using my water. I called the utility company. "Sorry, sir, we only read the meters," said the agent on the other end. "You'll have to check with your HOA for shared line issues." Course. The same people who fined me and closed every door. Still, the idea of shared lines struck a nerve. I remembered something Carlos had said. It was like the water was going somewhere else. That somewhere might not be random. I grabbed my wrench and headed to the side of the house where the main shut-off valve was located. Just above it sat the water meter, a dusty, circular fixture embedded in a cement box. I flipped it open. The needle was spinning. Slowly, steadily, but spinning. I took a deep breath and twisted the valve shut. Waited. Checked the meter. Still spinning. Which meant my water was feeding something beyond my property line. My stomach dropped. That evening, under the dim orange light of the street lamp, I watched Karen's yard from my window. Her sprinklers hissed to life right at 7 p.m. Perfectly timed, perfectly spaced, and very clearly illegal. The HOA handbook stated no irrigation was allowed after 6 p.m. due to water conservation mandates. But she didn't care. Rules were for everyone else. Her grass glistened like a commercial. Her roses bloomed in colors I hadn't seen in a decade. It was the only lush yard in a block full of gravel and cactus. I slipped outside with my phone and filmed quietly from behind my mailbox. Then I noticed something strange. Her side yard had a fresh patch of dirt, darker than the rest, damp even. A section that hadn't existed last week. Half covered with mulch, like someone had been digging and didn't bother to finish the job. Connection. I needed help. The next morning, I knocked on Carlos Alvarez's door. He opened it in sweatpants and a skeptical squint. Didn't think I'd see you again. I have a theory, I said. And I think you were right all along. About the water. He waved me in. We sat at his dining table while I laid it out. The spike in usage, the constantly spinning meter, the sprinkler violation, and the suspicious dirt patch. Carlos leaned back, arms crossed. You think Karen's garden is running off your meter? I think it's been happening for a while. Maybe not just to me. Maybe to anyone she wants to control. His eyebrows arched. That's not just a fine. That's theft. Exactly. He tapped the table with his knuckles. I know a guy. Licensed plumber. Works quiet. Discreet. If there's something funny going on underground, he'll find it. He nodded. Let's set it up. 2 days later I met the plumber, Miguel Torres, behind my backyard fence at dawn. He was quiet, efficient, and had the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many bad installations. I showed him the meter, the shut-off valve, and the still-spinning needle. He didn't say much. Just scribbled notes, then walked the property with a ground mic and a thermal sensor. After 20 minutes, he crouched near my fence line. Water's flowing here, he said, tapping the soil with a metal probe. But not from your irrigation system. He moved a few feet toward Karen's side yard. More beeps. More readings. Then he pointed. Right there. Pipe junction. Someone's run a secondary line. My jaw tightened. To her property. He nodded. Buried shallow. Poorly patched. Probably branched off your main. I've seen it before. People piggybacking off neighbors to dodge bills. Karen. Queen. Water conservation preacher. Stealing from her own residence. I felt my blood boil. But I forced myself to stay calm. Can you prove it? Miguel smiled. I've got photos, timestamps, pressure readings. And once we isolate the line and cap it, your meter should stop spinning. How long? Give me 2 hours. When he was done, the results were undeniable. Meter stop. Soil around the cap junction dry. Photos. Time-stamped, geotagged, irrefutable. Karen had run a line from my system straight into her side yard, feeding her precious lawn, roses, and backyard koi pond with my water. My fines. My skyrocketing bills. My humiliation. She did it all while pretending to be the guardian of neighborhood ethics. I paid Miguel in cash and made sure he sent every photo to a cloud folder. I backed up everything twice. Then I sat in my living room, staring at my laptop, deciding how I wanted to play it. I could go to the police. I could post the photos on the neighborhood forum. But something about that felt too easy. Karen had built her little empire on power, fear, and control. If I wanted to take her down, I had to do it in a way that made her feel what she made all of us feel. Exposed. Cornered. Powerless. By the end of the week I had everything I needed. Photos, documents, testimony, and a cold fire in my chest that wouldn't go out. But I wasn't going to charge in guns blazing. Not yet. I wanted to watch her squirm first. That Friday, Karen strutted through the community like a sheriff on parade. Clipboard in one hand, her phone in the other, barking citations at lawn chairs left out too long, holiday lights not yet taken down, and a barbecue grill visible from the street. Her confidence was sickening. She wasn't just untouchable. She believed she was invincible. And maybe she had been. Till now. I started with the water board. Quiet call. Calm, professional. I explained the tampering. Gave them the meter numbers. The plumbing photos. The spike timeline. The agent on the other end fell quiet after reviewing the documents. This is serious, she said. Unauthorized water diversion is a criminal offense. If a neighbor is tapping into your line, especially an HOA official, we need to escalate this. I'll cooperate fully, I told her. But I want to be present when you inspect the line. I need to see her face when she gets caught. There was a pause. Then a small chuckle. You won't want to miss it. Then I contacted 3 other neighbors. Quietly, discreetly. Carlos introduced me to them. All of them had, at one time or another, been fined by Karen for water violations. All of them had seen strange spikes in usage. And all of them had eventually given up, assuming it was their fault. But I had them look at their meters just like I did. 2 of them still had unexplained movement even after turning off the main. Karen wasn't just stealing from me. She'd been doing it for months, maybe years, tapping into multiple water lines, covering it up with fake fines, and using the power of the HOA to silence anyone who pushed back. This wasn't a neighborly squabble. This was fraud. By Monday, the utility board had filed for a formal inspection order. They'd be sending a technician out Wednesday morning with law enforcement in tow. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted Karen to feel the walls close in before she even saw them. So I printed flyers. Not accusations, questions. Do you know where your water is going? Has your bill spiked without explanation? Karen's garden is greener than yours. Ask yourself why. I taped them to bulletin boards, left them in mailboxes, slipped them between windshield wipers. I didn't sign them. I didn't have to. By the next evening, the neighborhood was buzzing. Whispers on front lawns. Suspicious glances across hedges. The atmosphere had shifted. The queen bee's hive was stirring. Karen must have felt it too. 'Cause on Tuesday she knocked on my door. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stormed into my entryway like she owned the air. Her lipstick was brighter than usual. Her fingers clutched her clipboard like a weapon. But for the first time since I moved to Pinebrook, she looked nervous. I know what you're doing, she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. You'll have to be more specific. The flyers. The gossip. Paranoia. You're trying to start a rebellion. I gave a half shrug. People have questions. I can't stop them from asking. She stepped closer. You don't understand the damage you're doing. This community relies on order. Structure. Without that, everything falls apart. I let that hang in the air. Then I said evenly, you mean without your control, things fall apart? She flinched. Just a little. Crack in the facade. You're angry because you were fined. But if you don't pay. Let's talk about that fine, I cut in. You accused me of overusing water. I shut off my main valve and the meter kept spinning. I had a plumber confirm it. Took photos. Dug up the pipe. You know what we found. Karen's face went pale. I stepped forward. A diversion line. Cut directly into my main. Running straight to your garden. That's not a violation. That's theft. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I leaned in, voice low. You should prepare, Karen. Because tomorrow the water board's coming. With law enforcement. Silence. Just the sound of her breathing, short, tight, clipped. Then she turned on her heel and walked out without another word. That night I barely slept. Not from nerves, from anticipation. I wasn't just winning. I was taking her down brick by brick. The whole neighborhood was waking up. People were asking questions. A few even emailed the HOA board demanding a vote to suspend Karen's presidency pending investigation. The kingmaker's crown was slipping. And the next morning, the fall began. At exactly 9 a.m., a white van from the water board pulled up outside Karen's house. A city-marked police cruiser followed closely behind. I watched from my porch with a mug in hand and Carlos by my side. 2 technicians stepped out. One carried a clipboard, the other a rolling toolkit. The officer followed them to the side yard with the freshly disturbed soil. Karen came out moments later in a silk robe, sunglasses, and a shaky smile. Too late. The lead technician pulled back the mulch and pointed. They found the pipe within seconds. Karen tried to speak. Gestured wildly. The officer asked her to step aside. 10 minutes later they capped the line and took photos. Then the officer took Karen's statement. Not an arrest, but the beginning of one. I watched her try to keep composure. Her lips trembled. Her hands shook. And for the first time, the mighty HOA queen looked exactly like what she was. A thief caught in the spotlight. By that afternoon, Pinebrook wasn't the same neighborhood. The sun was high, but the air was thick with tension. like the entire community was holding its breath. Word spread faster than wildfire. Phones buzzed. Screenshots were shared. One neighbor caught the inspection on camera and posted it to the HOA's private Facebook group. Within an hour, it had over 200 comments. Karen was nowhere to be seen. She had retreated, her pastel parasol, her clipboard, her high heels, gone. For the first time in years, the street was free of her judgmental stare. And for the first time in years, people were speaking freely. Carlos and I stood in front of my driveway as neighbors drifted over, cautiously at first, then in clusters. The ones who had once smiled at Karen out of obligation were now shaking their heads in disbelief, whispering things they'd kept inside too long. "You were right. I always thought something was off with her. She fined me for a wet sidewalk while she was draining our bills dry." Everyone had a story. Everyone had a grudge. But now, they had a cause. That evening, an emergency HOA board meeting was announced. It wasn't Karen who called it, she couldn't. Her authority was now under formal suspension pending investigation. Instead, it was Vice President Marcia Dean, a soft-spoken widow who had always seemed 2 steps behind Karen's drama but was surprisingly sharp when it counted. The community center filled faster than I'd ever seen. Folding chairs scraped across tile. The air buzzed with low murmurs and crossed arms. Then Marcia stepped up to the mic and cleared her throat. "Good evening, residents of Pinebrook," she began, voice steady but weighted. "As many of you are now aware, there is an ongoing investigation involving misuse of community water lines and abuse of HOA authority." The room fell silent. "We take this matter seriously. Effective immediately, Karen Wilcox is suspended from all HOA duties, including enforcement and communications. Further action will be determined by the outcome of the investigation." There were nods. A few murmurs of agreement. One neighbor clapped, quickly joined by others. Then Marcia looked up and locked eyes with me. "We've also received multiple complaints about unusual fines, meter inconsistencies, and unexplained bill increases. We are forming a resident-led oversight committee to audit these matters and recommend restitution where appropriate." More applause. This time louder. Marcia gestured for me to stand. "Mr. Taylor brought this issue to our attention with persistence, documentation, and respect for due process. We owe him a debt of thanks." I didn't expect the clapping to turn into a standing ovation, but it did. And in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was about people finally reclaiming their voice. The following week, I was elected chair of the HOA Oversight Committee. We were tasked with reviewing all fines issued under Karen's authority in the past 2 years. It didn't take long to find the pattern: arbitrary penalties, conflicting citations, and dozens of residents who had been financially pressured without proper cause. For some, it was small amounts, $50 here, $100 there. But for others it was thousands. Sprinkler violations, gutter angles, even mailbox paint shades. Every one of them linked back to Karen. She had used the HOA like a personal aim, exploiting the rules she enforced, punishing dissenters, and rewarding those who stayed silent. But now we had proof. And we had leveraged. Karen was officially charged with utility theft and HOA fraud by the city. The news made the local press. A half-page article in the Chandler Daily featured her mugshot beside a damning headline: "HOA President accused of water theft, faces criminal charges." That picture told 1,000 stories. The once pristine Karen Wilcox now looked haggard, her eyes sunken, her posture defeated. And the residents of Pinebrook, they weren't angry anymore. They were empowered. The board voted to refund all illegitimate fines and remove Karen's policies from the HOA charter. They even passed a bylaw restricting unilateral authority, ensuring no one person could ever again rule the community unchecked. And me. I finally fixed the dent in my front fence, trimmed my hedges, even started watering my lawn again, on my terms. No more notes. No more threats. Just peace. One evening I found myself walking with Carlos through the neighborhood. Kids were playing basketball in a driveway that used to be under threat of citation. A couple barbecued in their front yard without hiding behind a hedge. Porch lights stayed on past the HOA-mandated light curfew, and no one cared. Felt real. Like a neighborhood again. Carlos nudged me. You know, some folks are talking about you running for HOA president. I laughed. No thanks. I've had enough politics for a lifetime. He shrugged. Still, it's nice. Not having to look over your shoulder. I nodded, eyes drifting to the house next door. Karen's house. The blinds were shut. The garden looked dry, overgrown, forgotten. Nature was reclaiming it. So were we. 3 months after Karen's downfall, the neighborhood had transformed. Not just in how it looked, but how it felt. Pinebrook no longer buzzed with tension. Breathe. Laughter echoed from front yards. Neighbors waved from porches. Even the once silent cul-de-sac had come alive with potlucks, lawn games, and late-night conversations. The fear that had lingered like fog under Karen's reign had finally lifted. And with it, something unexpected emerged. Community. My role as chair of the Oversight Committee kept me busy. I never intended to become involved in neighborhood governance, but the more I listened to people's stories, the more I realized how deeply Karen's influence had eroded trust. Single parents who'd been fined for leaving toys on their porch. Elderly residents bullied into repainting fences they couldn't afford. Veterans like Carlos, who had once served their country, treated like nuisances for displaying flags or holding quiet backyard barbecues. Each file we reviewed was a scar. And each reversal a stitch. We refunded over $17,000 in wrongful fines. Cancelled dozens of arbitrary violations. And perhaps most importantly, we rewrote the HOA bylaws. Publicly, transparently, with community input. Gone were the days of closed-door decisions. Now every voice mattered. I did eventually run for HOA president. Not because I wanted power, but because people asked me to. They trusted me. And this time the vote wasn't close. In a unanimous landslide, the residents of Pinebrook chose me to lead. Not with fear, but with fairness. At the first meeting of the new term, I stood at the same podium Karen once lorded over. But instead of issuing fines, I started with a question. What do you want Pinebrook to be? The answers flowed in, diverse, passionate, hopeful. And from that day forward we built together. As for Karen, she never returned. After being convicted of misdemeanor utility theft and civil HOA fraud, she was fined heavily and banned from holding any HOA office in the state for 5 years. Her house sat unsold for months, the grass growing tall, the shutters peeling. Eventually, a young couple bought it, a schoolteacher and a nurse with 2 kids and a golden retriever. The place came alive again with squeals and barking and wind chimes that jingled through the afternoon air. It was poetic. Karen had tried to make the neighborhood hers alone. But in the end, it belonged to everyone. One afternoon, I found myself standing by the same water meter that had started it all. The lid was still a little rusted, the soil around it packed tight. I knelt beside it, flipping it open with a flathead screwdriver. The numbers were still and silent. Smiled. No leaks, no theft, no secrets, just water flowing where it was meant to. Carlos walked up beside me, sipping from a Gatorade bottle. Checking for ghosts, he teased. Just making sure history doesn't repeat itself, I replied. He nodded toward the sidewalk. Well, if it does, we've got an army now. It was true. The same people who once whispered in private now stood tall in public. The same people Karen silenced now chaired committees, planned events, helped seniors mow their lawns. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. At the next HOA meeting, I opened with a new initiative. The Pinebrook Community Garden. Not a fancy one. Just a small plot on the old tennis court, sectioned off into raised beds, open to anyone who wanted to grow flowers, vegetables, or herbs. We named it Karen's Garden, not as an insult but as a reminder. A reminder that things can grow again after ruin. That control can crumble, but community can bloom. As the sun set on another quiet golden evening, I sat on my porch with a cold drink in hand, watching sprinklers arc across healthy lawns and kids pedal down the street. I thought about everything that had happened. About how something as simple as a water bill had pulled back the curtain on years of abuse. About how standing up, quietly, persistently with the truth, could topple even the most immovable tyrants. And I thought about Karen. How she once said, "Without structure, everything falls apart." She was wrong. Without justice, things fall apart. But with it, they come back stronger than ever.